everyone, and welcome to the Maitland City Council meeting of July 11th, 2022. Please, everyone, silence your electronic devices. And to begin the meeting, if you please join me in a moment of silence. Join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. We are going to get started tonight with a presentation on water and sewer rates from Brian Banks. And this is a discussion that will help us to frame the utility rates and as we're getting ready for the budget season.
Yeah. So, Mayor, as you know, the city annually reviews our financial position in the utility system through the budget process. However, the last formal rate study we had, was presented to City Council, was completed in 2014. So based upon the recommendations of that 2014 study, a series of rate adjustments were adopted through fiscal year 2019, after which the rate increases were annually indexed as is recognized in the city code. Current water and wastewater rates have been in effect since October 1st of 2001. So as part of the current utility rate study, Brian's done some financial projections and are prepared to look at the system through the year 2027. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian, who's been working with us for the last several months to put this together, to show what we've come up with.
Well, good evening. My name is Brian Mance from GovRates, and of course, as Mark mentioned, I'm here to present the results of the water and wastewater utility rate study. So I have about 25 slides of material, and I will try and get through it as efficiently as possible. So as far as Maitland's utility is concerned, as everyone knows, it provides an essential service on a continuous basis, where public health and safety is the primary objective. It's also a highly regulated utility, and there's many big brothers that are always watching to make sure that the utility is doing what it's supposed to be. The utility is regulated by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the St. Johns River Water Management District, the Florida Department of Health, the EPA, and permits issued by many of these entities require satisfactory operating performance. And if, God forbid, the utility were to experience the infrastructure failure and cause pollution, or if got out of regulatory compliance, these regulatory agencies do have the ability to fine or issue a consent order ordering you to do something. The utility is also accounted for as an enterprise fund, which in government accounting is used to account for enterprises that are operated similar to private businesses, where the operations are primarily funded through user rates. And the utility has substantial infrastructure under city management. Just the cost of the installed assets is about $41.3 million. However, if we were to take a look at the age of the assets and kind of right-size them by historical increases in the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index, which is used by a lot of engineering firms, there could be a possible replacement cost of the assets in today's dollars of $79 million. With respect to the rate study, what we do is we try and identify what we call revenue requirements, or what we need to recover through rates. So that includes operation and maintenance expenses, debt service, and there are also certain coverage requirements associated that your net revenues have to be a certain amount above the debt service. Capital improvement program funding through rates, administrative transfers, and cash reserve allowances. All these considerations together make up what we call the annual revenue requirements that must be recovered through rates. Major cost factors affecting the water and wastewater utility system. Utility infrastructure is very often out of sight, out of mind. But certainly as this infrastructure ages, it needs to be replaced. And the cost of the utilities capital needs could be substantially higher than what we've estimated in this study. Right now, as many of you are aware, it's a contractor's market. And I've had clients that have received bids that are twice what the planning estimates are. But right now, we're moving forward with an estimated $30.6 million of capital needs through 2027. These include lift station and force main upgrades, improvements to ensure that the wastewater system can meet current and future demands. You've got some 40-year-old infrastructure that's past the typical service life. You got clay pipes in some areas, and these are not pictures of Maitland infrastructure, but it is some pictures of aging utility infrastructure that I've collected from other utilities in the state of Florida, and it just shows that in 30, 40 years, it just it clearly is these are clearly assets that need to be replaced. We got rehabilitation of gravity sewer mains and manholes that are over 60 years old. We've got the sanitary sewer construction in Domrick Hills to replace the septic tanks with city sewer, and the city has secured multiple low-cost state revolving fund loans through the FDP to help fund that, and also got some matching grants also. We've got a water plant rehabilitation to ensure that the city has enough capacity in water storage, given system growth and the requirements of the St. Johns River Water Management District and the FDP. We've got replacement of 60-year-old water lines to ensure adequate water pressure and fire flow. And here's just kind of a brief summary of the capital needs, which again are primarily just replacements. Right now, as far as projected funding in the capital improvement program, the majority of it is projected to be debt finance, but there's also some grant funding for the Domrick Hills Phase 2 to 4, and there are also some pay-as-you-go funding. So we feel like there's a good balance of debt financing and pay-as-you-go, so that the city does not become overly leveraged. Also, operating expenses have increased substantially and are projected to continue increasing. These are currently over 70% of what we recover from our rates. There's obviously been inflationary effects due to COVID-19 and also global unrest. The Miami-Fort Lauderdale West Palm Beach Consumer Price Index, which is one of the few local consumer price indexes that's published for Florida, increased by 9.6% from April 2021 to April 2022. And the utility has experienced substantial increases in the utility supply costs of chemicals, steel, PVC pipes, and other materials. We've also recognized the need for additional personnel to help address operating and capital needs. And it's been a nationwide problem with filling positions and keeping employees. Most of the clients I work with are experiencing that, where you have people going down the road for a couple more dollars per hour, and a lot of them are involved in pay studies. So it's a nationwide issue. Of course, the utility would is also, as you know, your wastewater is treated by both Altamonte Springs or the city of Orlando. And this is an uncontrollable cost, and it's over 50% of your wastewater operating expenses. And obviously, we anticipate that these costs are going to continue to increase, as these utilities are affected by the same inflationary forces that your utility is. And we've projected operating expenses at an overall compound annual growth rate of 4%. We're anticipating that some of these costs are going to stabilize over time. But a key takeaway from all this is that permanent increases in costs must ultimately be passed through to customers through rates. So if your costs go up 3% and you don't pass them through, and then they go up another 3% the following year, well then suddenly you're 6% behind, and you have to, at some point you have to catch up. And I'll stress multiple times during this presentation that the best approach is to just gradually increase the rates incrementally over time. So this graph here shows the different components that we recover through rates and make up the quote revenue requirements that I was talking about earlier. This bottom dark blue bar is operating expenses. The green portion of the bar is debt service, and then this light blue component is basically pay-as-you-go funding through rates. This solid red line here represents revenues under existing rates if we did nothing. And if our rates were sufficient to meet everything we needed them to recover, this bar would intersect at the top of this. I'm sorry, the line would intersect at the top of these bars, but it's not. So we do need a little bit of help to meet all of our requirements over the next few years. And you can see that if we don't do anything, we won't even be able to meet our debt service. What are the financial risks of not adjusting rates? Well, obviously, an inability to fund all the revenue requirements, fund the capital program, and to meet financial targets. You could also have an inability to secure additional debt financing for your critical capital needs. When you approach someone to get some debt financing, they want to see that you have a rate and financial plan that's been adopted that is sufficient to fund the debt service. And another financial risk is that user rates will be even higher in the future because the capital needs of the utilities are not going to go away. When you have infrastructure like the sample pictures I provided, those aren't going to go away, but they're only going to become more expensive to address. And as I mentioned, all these regulatory agencies do have the power to provide to fine the utility or issue consent orders if there are any infrastructure failures. And another key takeaway, in addition to not being able to secure additional debt financing to help keep the rates lower, you can also lose the ability to gradually phase in the rates adjustments over time. And again, this chart here shows that without rate adjustments, the utility would run into coverage requirements that are associated with the existing and anticipated debt, and you'd quickly run out of cash. So there's definitely a need. So let's talk about the projected need for revenue adjustments. Right now, if you did nothing right now, the city code does allow annual indexing, and by the Florida Public Service Commission deflator index, and that for for this year was 6.8%. So the 6.8% is already adopted, and we've assumed that it'll be closer to 2% going forward. What we're recommending is 2 9% in 2023 and 2024, followed by 3 6%. So what that means for a single-family residential customer using 5,000 gallons, which is the average usage of a single-family residential customer, that would be about for 2023. That would be an extra $6.44 per month. As one of the client said that when we were having some city council sessions last week, one of my city council, as one of my clients mentioned, your cell phone bill or your cable bill, it typically goes up each year by the additional amount that we're asking for here. Another takeaway is just the value of water and sewer service. As you can see, if I were to take a bill for a customer using 5,000 gallons and divide it by 5,000 gallons, you're paying around 1.5 cents to 2 cents per gallon. And you compare that to the gallon prices of some other commodities that you might buy. I was staying in a hotel in Plantation last week, and there was a bottle of water in my room, and it had a price tag of $4. So that just kind of shows the little bottled water was $4, and here, for 5,000 gallons of service, you're only paying 1.5 cents to 2 cents per gallon. So that kind of communicates the value of the service. Of course, one thing that we do always want to consider is our rate and financial plan affordable? And the Environmental Protection Agency has a metric of 4.5% of median household income as their affordability metric. And based on Maitland's median household income, there is you are well below you're below 1.5%, well below the 4.5% affordability threshold. And I do work with some utilities that do have affordability issues. And so the good news is that this plan is affordable by any utility industry standards. And again, another, as I've mentioned before, smaller incremental rate increases over time help to avoid future rate shock and catch-up increases. Every time I've had to communicate to the need for a 95% increase or a 56% increase, I always get the same response from the governing body. I wish we had just gradually increased the rates over time. It's just a best management practice to just not have rate shock or catch-up increases. So what we show here is that, I talked about how the replacement cost new of the system had a high-level estimate of $79 million. To replace assets with a 30-year life, you should ideally set aside about 3.33% or 1/30th of the asset value each year, replacement cost each year, so that by the time you have to replace the asset, the money is there. As you can see from, okay, you can see it, at least on that side. You can see that we're showing that by 2027, we're at about 2%. We're having amounts available for capital reinvestment equal to about 2% of the median household of the estimated replacement cost. Not quite where we want to be, but it is something that we have a long-term goal of improving the utility's financial metrics. As far as the projected financial position, you can see that if you were bond financing, a AA rated utility would have unrestricted cash equal to at least 365 days of cash on hand, and all-in debt service coverage of at least 200%. We're not there, and we're not anticipating that there's going to be bond financing, and so we're not striving to recommend rates even more to reach the AA. I know that Mark has introduced an alternative scenario of, instead of 2 9s and 3 6s, having 3 9s and 2 6s, and that would get us a little closer to where we would ideally want to be. But and that's something that the council could consider. again, there's a long-term goal to improve the utilities' financial metrics. Now, so let's talk about the user rate comparison at 5,000 gallons of monthly usage, which is the average of a single-family residential home, average monthly usage in the system. You can see that right now your rates are about $70.84. They'd go up to $77.38. And while this may look a little bit on the high side in this local area, I'm aware of at least 100 utilities in the state of Florida that have higher rates than what is proposed for Maitland. And another key takeaway from this is all the utilities that have a little star next to them. These are utilities that are either involved in a rate study, they're planning to conduct one, they'll implement a rate, or they're planning already have a rate revision plan. And that's virtually all of them. So the takeaway is that as Maitland would increase your rates, everyone else is going to be doing the same thing, and you would continue to be competitive. That being said, a rate comparison is not a report card on how well the utility is performing, because there are a lot of reasons why user rates differ among utilities, like the size of the customer base, the level of capital improvements, your source of water supply. Someone having to treat salt water is going to have more expensive treatment costs than someone treating fresh water. And time of last review. A lot of times when you see the utilities on the lowest end on that comparison chart, you'll see that you'll find operating losses or utilities that are not expeditiously addressing their renewal and replacement needs. So it's there's just a lot of reasons why they differ, and so that's important. It's not a report card. As far as utility connection fees or impact fees, these support a policy of growth paying for growth. In other words, they help to reduce the need for monthly user rate increases. These are paid by developers, not by users. And there are certain laws, legal requirements that we have to follow when looking at the impact fees. But they were last reviewed in 2014, and since that time, the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index, which was the index that I referenced previously, has increased about 24%. What we're recommending that the fees be increased by from 5,080 combined water and wastewater to 6,215, or an increase of about 1,135. It's these costs per gallon are these amounts meet all reasonable tests as far as the combined increase is close to the historical increases in the construction cost index. As far as how the city compares, here you can see you're neither the highest nor the lowest. You're in with you're lower. You would be lower than the city of Deltona, Claremont, St. Cloud, and Ocoee. And it's very important to note that a lot of utilities don't right size these fees on a regular basis. So you may be looking at some fees here that haven't been adjusted for 20 years. Seminole County just had that situation where they hadn't looked at right sized their fees since 2004, and now their fees are they just recently increased their fees significantly. But just like user rates, impact fees are not they're not a report card on how well the utility is performing. So one thing that we're the current right now, as I mentioned, the city code allows annual indexing by the Florida Public Service Commission Deflator Index. Well, in reviewing the historical increases in this index, it's not really keeping up with the utilities' costs. And so we're recommending a change in the indexing provision to the engineering news record construction cost index with a cap at 5%. So any increase above 5% would require city council approval. Now, we've also, as part of this exercise, the staff is currently looking at the other or miscellaneous service charges, such as meter installation charges, turn on off fees. Like I said, they're currently being right-sized by the city staff, and I'm reviewing it as part of the exercise. And one thing that we're looking at is current utility costs to provide service, in comparison with the similar charges of other Florida utilities and city policies. And we don't have that set of rates ready for your consideration at this point, but it would be part of the overall rate study analysis. And a key takeaway from these types of charges is that to the extent that these charges, these other charges, what these charges do is they shift cost recovery to the people actually using the service. And to the extent that you don't right-size them or that they don't reflect the cost of providing the service, the cost difference must be paid through the monthly user rates of all customers. Basically, other customers are subsidizing the people, wanting a meter installation. And so it's good to periodically right-size these fees. So, toward the end, and so our recommendations are to adopt the proposed schedule of water and wastewater user rates for 2023 to 2027. Again, smaller incremental rate increases over time help to avoid future rate shock and catch-up increases. The user rates are affordable and competitive by any industry standards, and they're necessary to secure the anticipated additional debt financing for the utilities' capital needs. For example, the SRF loan program and lenders, they'll only consider rate increases when they're evaluating your ability to repay debt. They will only consider increases that have been adopted, although SRF will allow like a 2% allowance for CPI. We do recommend that adopt the proposed water and wastewater impact fees, which are right-sized based on the most recent local data. Again, these are paid these are paid by development. They're competitive with the impact fees of neighboring utilities. They help to reduce the need for future user rate adjustments, and they support the concept of growth paying for growth. And they help reduce the need to finance capital improvements, so you have lower interest and issuance costs. And we do recommend as part of the package to adopt the miscellaneous service charges that are right-sized to eliminate subsidization from the monthly user rates, and we also recommend adoption of the proposed changes to the rate indexing clause. Again, indexing is considered a utility best management practice. Another thing to consider is possibly adopting future user rate increases by resolution instead of ordinance. So this provides higher efficiency and could enable the city to adjust more quickly to cost increases such as wholesale rate increases from Altamont Springs or Orlando. It's very common among utilities to adopt user rates by resolution instead of ordinance, and we recommend that instead of so it's just more efficient. And what I will tell members of the governing body is that if you have a resolution and you're not ready to vote, or you think it's not ready to be voted on, you can always defer it to the next meeting. And so you're always in charge. So you don't have to, just because you would normally have just one reading. If you feel like changes are needed, it can be adopted at the next meeting. So I really don't see much downside in doing it by resolution instead of ordinance. And then finally, to update the financial and rate plan as needed. A key takeaway is that proactive financial planning helps to preserve the ability to gradually phase in any rate adjustments. So, looks like had a little bit of repeat there. So anyway, that concludes the presentation, and I think the direction. I mean, we don't have anything to adopt tonight. And Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong. The idea is I think we would, assuming you're okay with moving forward, you would direct staff to bring forth, I guess, an ordinance to incorporate these recommendations.
Yeah, that's what we looked for. Since it's a presentation, we wanted you to have all the facts before we went ahead and started drafting an ordinance. So a lot of it's stuff that we would typically do anyway when we do a rate study, but sort of the three key questions we need some direction on is, number one, are you comfortable with the increases, the 99666? In the future, are you comfortable with adopting future rate increases by resolution versus ordinance? And as far as the cost adjustments go, with the 5%, with anything above 5% coming to City Council, I think that those are the key points of direction that we'd be looking for tonight.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that perhaps we're not looking at, or there are two options. One is 99666 or one is 99966. What is your feeling about the importance of that, and how would that help us be where we need to be? Is that going to be a significant change? Because I think all the numbers that we had in the presentation were really just based on the 99666.
Right, and obviously it wouldn't change 2023 or 2024. It would just be 2025. The more money you get up front, you get some time value of money benefit, and so you would wind up with stronger debt service coverage that would make you look better to lenders. And when you look better to lenders, they'll give you more favorable interest rates, and obviously the rating agencies might give, if you issue bonds in the future, the rating agencies would you would look better to the rating agencies too. Obviously, if you have a higher credit rating, you could get more, you could secure lower interest rates, and would also, and corresponding lower issuance costs when debt financing. So there's definitely a benefit to doing I guess a 99966 over a 99666. I don't think it's going to, like I said, it's not this whole rate and financial plan is not it's not an affordability issue, but it definitely could make you look a little bit better. And I would still consider that the 99966 would still be, gradually increasing the rates over time. So I think it would be, definitely, like I said, it could make you look better.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question in general. If we were to explore transitioning from approving our rates resolution instead of ordinance, what mechanically do we need to do in order to do that?
Regardless, the first step is to put the ordinance together for this set of rate increases, and within that ordinance, you would say that future rate increases will be done by resolution.
It's a very simple clause that you put in.
And we'd say advertising costs, we'd say kind of the announcement happens.
Yeah, and as I think I've talked to most of you about, we've always taken a very conservative approach to most everything financial in the city, and if we're bringing a rate increase to you that would be above what we've shown here, there's a good reason for it. We're trying to keep the enterprise fund financially solvent, and we certainly don't want to do any backsliding. I mean, we're stable now, but we want to continue that and improve our financial situation within that fund, so we can continue to provide the service that we do. And my primary concern is taking care of our aging infrastructure. We need some attention there, and we need the funds to do that.
And I imagine there's enough in the CIP to keep you busy on that for a while. I mean, it's not a situation we've had in the past where we're kind of wanting to raise revenues without corresponding projects.
Oh,
to take care
no,
of.
I mean,
So-
just looking at our 5-year CIP, we'll fund what we need to do here, but we've got 30 years of just water line replacement that needs to be done.
Anybody else have anything? No? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Mance. It's always a pleasure to hear from you.
Thank you.
And I think, do you all have any feelings about perhaps for Mr. Megantine here, what he might start drafting? Let's start taking one at a time. Do we have any concerns really about the rates as they are, or do we have a preference for going one way or the other, the 996, etc.? I mean, I guess you could bring those to us at that time.
I can show you the difference. Yeah, the reason I brought it up is because as we started this process, we were concerned about affordability and what our capital plan, how that would have an impact on our rate structure. Because as Brian ran the first set of numbers, obviously you saw the affordability numbers came in very reasonable. But our long-term financial outlook was stable, but not getting us as close to where we wanted to be in the long term. So by making that change, it gets us there a little bit quicker, but still maintains the affordability index as well within the realm of where we want to be.
Okay. And as with regard to the resolution versus ordinance, I don't have any problem with doing that by resolution. I think it just saves time. I don't know that it's just an extra hurdle for us to get through, and it costs us extra advertising, money to, if it's an ordinance we have. And then poor Lori has to read out the whole thing and long involved syntax. So I don't have a problem with moving to a resolution. I think that's a cleaner way to do it. And I did have a question about, as you started off the presentation, you said that we had a 6.8% ability to raise the rates without any further, and now we're looking at, I think what you're saying is now it's 5%.
No, 9%.
Okay, so that's actually a reduction from our current.
Well, if you did nothing, the Florida, like I said, the CPI has been really, the Miami Fort Lauderdale CPI was close to 10% increase. The Florida Public Service Commission index that's currently in the city code, it's an atypical year, but it increased by 6.8%. And so all private utilities in the state of Florida that are regulated by the Florida Public Service Commission, they have the ability to increase their rates by 6.8%. But like I said, in looking at that, we felt like 6.8%. We really think that 9% will. 9% will give you more time value of money, as I mentioned. The more you get up front, the lower your rates are going to be over the long term. But as we want to also gradually increase the rates over time to help prevent future rate shock.
Well, I don't hear a lot of opposition to what you're proposing, so Mark, as far as what you might take your...
Okay, well, we can bring back both sets of rates, but do you want, in the ordinance itself, would you like me to include the 99966 and just have the rates you saw tonight available so you can make that decision at first reading?
Yeah, the first reading, we can take that and then look at it and see what the actual difference is and then make it.
And then include a clause for future adoptions by resolution. And then outside of the 5-year period, use the engineering news record as our indexing number. Any costs above 5%, there would come back to City Council.
Right.
And Kim's putting together numbers now for the miscellaneous charges. Those are going to be set up just to recoup costs.
Is that like to turn on?
Turn on,
That was what I was
turn
going to
on.
ask, how that affected our ability to, if we chose to do something. I mean, I've lived in plenty of cities where we had that and noticed it when I moved here. I didn't have to. So I didn't know how that would affect.
Yeah, so that's we're just looking at cost recovery there. We're not looking to...
And shifting the cost to the, making the customers that want the service to pay for the service, rather than having to, if it costs you $200 and you're only charging $100, then that extra $100 has to be subsidized by all of them.
But that is not going to affect the rate increases.
No, those are individual fees.
How would that affect people in our bills? Would that, in the connection fees that they're looking for, would they be grandfathered in? Because I know that they haven't been charged anything necessarily because they haven't been done, but
They would be paying
The
the
new
sewer
fee.
impact fee at the time of connection.
So there may be, I'm just thinking out loud here, there may be somewhat of a disconnect from what they thought they were going to pay as to what they would pay.
Yeah, and as we've been engaging folks in Donner Hills, we've been giving them the current fees. But as we've talked to them in the individual meetings we've had with them, we've always let them know that there's chances of rate increases, just like, because they're going to be hooked into our sewer too.
Mhm.
Those sewer rates are going to be going up too, so the numbers we gave them a year ago will be different than the numbers today
Right.
or in the future.
But I imagine the immediate impact would be for the connection fees,
Yeah.
not to turn on the fees rather than.
But we're also financing that for them for 10 years too.
Yeah.
So we're lessening the load there.
That is a good point, though, that Maryland is raising in terms of front-loading the percentage at the 9% for the first 3 years, which Mr. Mance explained why that makes sense to do, and I think that makes sense. But if we did it like theoretically backwards, which I understand why that would not be great for the city overall, then that would be better for those people, I guess, specifically. But
Well, this is not a decision item, it is kind of an informational item, so I think that you may have what you need there, Mark.
Yeah, I'll put the ordinance together with those parameters, and then we can further discuss it once you have that before you.
Right. Yeah, we've got a long way to go on it. This is a great first educational take on it. We got a couple of readings certainly and the whole budget to get through, so
Yep.
plenty of time to revisit this.
Yep.
And I guess their customer notification requirements.
Yep. Jerry's taking care of the customer notification requirements.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mance.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Old business. You haven't seen any old business?
No, sir.
All right. This is the consent agenda. Would anyone like to remove any items from the consent agenda?
Mayor, I'd like to clarify, actually add something to one of the consent agenda items. Consent agenda item number 4, we're planning on purchasing a police vehicle from Allen J. Fleet Sales. Since the publishing of this agenda, the chief has been able to locate a second vehicle that's available today, as this one is. And the way the vehicle market is right now, I would recommend that we take advantage of that to acquire that second vehicle. Both of these vehicles are budgeted for purchase next year. We'd like to advance those to this year, obviously using the vehicle designation fund balance where we purchase all of our vehicles from, and then replenishing that. But vehicles, as hard as they are to get, especially police vehicles, you got to strike while the iron's hot. We've had vehicles on order for a year and a half to 2 years that are just arriving now. So if we can get 2 vehicles that are in Central Florida already outfitted, it would make everyone's life a lot easier. So the only difference in cost there is $225. The vehicle that has been located is $225 more because of the light package. The light package has been installed on it. So I'd like to, at your pleasure, I could bring it back at the next meeting too, but since we have this agenda item tonight, and the vehicle is ready to take delivery, it's really just decaling it out.
Well, if we can get it for $225, I say take it.
Vehicle cost plus $225.
Okay, I got you. So,
Sorry.
all right. That's,
That would be in my driveway if we could get $225.
So we need to double
Yes.
the request and add $225.
Yes.
What does that come to total? Just so we know what we're voting on.
Like
One police lease package is $50,031. That's the current one.
Yep.
So we'd be there talking about $162,062.
Can I ask a question on an item on the consent without lifting it from the consent? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Sure.
50,287. For the next one. 50,287 plus 50,000. Mark, on the electric vehicle charging stations,
Yes, sir.
so are those where we're actually going to be the charging for the service? Like, so we would be the owner of that station?
Yes, sir.
Have we looked at the options of just leasing out the space and then letting another company operate the charging station and let them keep the profit off of that? Have we looked at that option?
Well, that is basically the deal we're looking at here with ChargePoint.
But it looked to me like, so, but we are buying.
Yes.
We are buying, so we own the actual station, not them.
Mhm.
Have we looked at the options where they own the station?
I have not looked at that up.
And have we looked at the options? There are grants, I know, like I've worked with clients who have gotten through the Volkswagen, I forget the name of their program, there's like Electrify America, or there's a program where it was part of the diesel settlement, they funded a program to put charging stations around, and they have actually gotten their costs to install these charging stations reimbursed through grants, through those programs. So, I forget the name of it, but it was part of the Volkswagen settlement. So, if we're gonna do them in the future, or even in these, I think there are grants available to get them paid for, and I think there are other options too to explore if we want to help get more of these, where we don't actually own the infrastructure of another company owns the infrastructure. So that's just two thoughts on that. If you look at it, and those are both not good.
Yeah, we could certainly look at that and bring it back. The reason we put this on is that there are cost increases of approximately 15% coming down the pike in August for these. So, but we can certainly take a look at that. If you'd like to follow up on this to the future meeting.
I mean, look, I understand the desire to get more of these. Those are just two options on potential subsidizing the cost or helping out the cost for the city.
Okay, so we have, one item is gone from 50,000 change to $100,349. Two police vehicles versus one, and that comes out of the budget for next year. This was going to happen anyway, it's just we're moving it up for a year. Okay, and Mr. Wild has some questions about the EV consent agenda item. Let me ask if anybody from the public has anything to say about items 2 through 7. We'll open up a public period on that.
Low hanging fruit, John.
All right. We'll close the public period on 2 through 7, and I think if anybody has a motion in mind, we probably want to take care of one or two of the items we just talked
So how do you want to tackle this, John? Do you want to?
about. Well, I guess, let me ask Mark, I mean, so is there any, it sounds like, Mike, you have some concerns about there might be a better way to finance this, a better way to handle it, and that's fine.
I'm not sure they're better. They could be terrible,
Uh,
but there are things that I have just had experience with. So if you've looked at them, or if we don't want to look at them, and we want to look at those for round 2, I'm okay with, if the staff has looked at this and they think this is the best, I'm fine with trying to get more charging, but we don't have a ton of charging stations available around the city. So I get the need to do this. So, but I think if you could, if we say okay to this, but then have you all look at those potential options, and if you find a better one.
So, Mark, do you feel like there's any downside of waiting another 2 weeks? I know you just said that you thought that perhaps we're going to miss an opportunity at costs here.
Yes, that would be it, because it'll be a 15% cost increase in August.
Okay, so I think what you hear you saying, Mike, is like if we could approve this subject to Mark perhaps taking another look at a couple of those, and if he thinks better of it, come back and ask us.
We got one more meeting in July, right?
I'm just not sure what I'll be able to put together in a week, because that's kind of the deadline to get the agenda together. And there's a series of budget meetings.
Right.
If we place
that I'm
the
working very hard
order,
to focus on right now.
if we place the order, is there the ability to cancel it before they're actually come in, or are we locked into paying up front, or how does that work?
Yeah, once we put the order in, once we put the purchase order in,
Okay, yeah.
yes.
So you've got, what, 5 days before you
Yeah.
have to pull the trigger on that?
I don't want to scuttle this because I'm all for this, but I actually do have a follow-up question. I recall seeing that on the plans for Fort Maitland, in the parking lot, there was going to be a charging station, but it's not listed on here as one of them.
That was already approved with Fort Maitland plans.
Okay,
Yes,
so
that's a big-
is that going to be the same kind of charging station? Okay. And we're going to consistently use the same ones throughout the city as we go forward?
That's the idea.
Okay, cool.
Well, Mike, I guess it's kind of your call how you'd like to handle that. I mean, I guess what we can say is, we can approve this in a spare time the next 5 days with the rec team. Or we can just ask him and say, we can hold off on this and just take some risk that we might have an increase, but we might be a boon to it. Who knows?
I'm never trying to have you all chase down something that ends up being a waste of time or cost us 15% more. So like I said, I would be supportive if they've already chased this down and this is something that the staff thinks is good. I'm good supporting it, but I would say look into these options and maybe look into it, especially. I mean, this is only 5, and it's costing potentially $101,000. And if we really want to, I mean, I think we all know that to really make an impact, you're going to need a whole lot more than 5. So I don't think we want to spend $101,000 each time we need 5 more. So I think that looking at options for how we could do something to reduce the cost or get some partners on this, I think is a good idea. That's mine.
Going forward.
Or now, but certainly on the go forward.
Okay.
To the extent that's possible.
I mean, I'm sensitive to Mark's time and the fact that there's a limited amount of it right now. And we do want to add more of these to the city as a proof of concept to start to be more sustainable with the work that we're doing to try and add more electric vehicle charging to encourage residents to use it. Also, I know we have talked about having an electric vehicle program for city vehicles, and we would have to have charging stations for those city vehicles to actually be able to plug into. So I think it makes sense right now with an eye towards trying to find alternative sources of funding to give us support for adding and enhancing the program in the future. That's, if we had a sustainability person whose job was to trace down these sorts of grants, that would really be great.
Okay. Does that get us any closer to a motion?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
You gotta add, you gotta double
What are we doing with?
you gotta double the police and add 250.
There we go. So motion to approve the consent agenda, including the additional police vehicle plus 250. 225,
Sorry.
plus a number. Plus 220. Plus 225.
Ish.
Okay, we have a motion.
I second.
Motion and a second. Laura, would you take the vote?
Councilmember Wyatt, Councilmember Wurzel,
Aye.
Councilmember Hall Harrison. Aye. Mayor Lambert.
Aye. Okay, we've got the consent agenda. Now is the time for the famous Maitland public period where anyone can address us on an item that's not actually on the agenda. We invite any and all interested people to approach voting. And seeing none, let's close the public period. We do have a decision item this evening, and it's dealing with the Board of Adjustments and Appeals, and Laura, would you please release the item?
As we talked about.
Want me to take it, Lori?
This was discussed at the May 23rd, 2022 council meeting. There are currently 4 vacancies on the Board of Adjustment and Appeals. The purpose of the board is to hear appeals regarding the interpretations of Florida building code by the building official and appeals of interpretation of the Florida Fire Prevention Code by the fire marshal. Under the current system, the BAA would hear appeals from owners or contractors if a disagreement arose between the city and the owner or contractor's interpretation of the building or fire code. Either party disagreed with BAA, the determination could be appealed by the Florida Building Commission or State Fire Marshal's Office, following the procedures described in the attachments to this report. The BAA has not met since 2009. It's a 5-member, 1 alternate member board, and currently we have 2 members and 1 viable applicant. I think Mark has more to add.
Yeah, so what the council requested us to look at last meeting, we discussed this, was alternatives to a BAA with specific reference to process and timeframes. If the BAA went away, what would that look like? First thing that we discussed was the potential of using Orange County's Board of Adjustments and Appeals to hear our appeals. Mr. Mathis reached out to the Orange County building official to see if that was an option. That is not an option for obvious reasons. If the building official in Maitland is making determinations, not the building official in Orange County, the building official in Orange County might not even agree with the interpretations by the building or fire official here in Maitland. So he said that's not an option. It's not something they do for other cities either, so it would be a one-off. So that's really off the table. So as an alternative, and as the statute addresses, in absence of a local appeals process, appeals can be heard directly by either the Florida Building Commission or the State Fire Marshal's Office. From a building code standpoint, an appeal is filed on a form that's provided by the Florida Building Commission, sent up to the commission. They have a 31-day time period where they have to respond to that. One of the questions that Councilmember Wild had was, were people going to have to make a trip to Tallahassee to do this? This is all done electronically, all done by filling out forms and sending them to the building commission. The building commission renders decision back to the building official, so there's no in-person meetings required. Appeals in the State Fire Marshal's Office for an interpretation are handled in a similar manner with a request for a declaratory statement. The State Fire Marshal's Office has to return that judgment. Same process. We fill out a form from the State Fire Marshal's Office, send it to them for an expedited decision. That's a 45-day period. For a standard decision, is 90 days to get that DEC statement. Again, all done through correspondence, so no in-person meetings are required. As we're going through this, one additional factor that we probably need to take into consideration is that from a fire code standpoint, there are very specific requirements of members of a local appeals board. I've listed those out in the staff report. There has to be a member that has engineering or architectural design background, general contractor, fire protection contractor, fire department operations or code enforcement background, or building code enforcement background, or a legal background. And no more than one member can sit on a board from one of those fields. You can't have two general contractors or two fire protection contractors, so it has to be a balanced board. So that will make it more difficult to fill our board. Probably wouldn't even meet criteria. If you choose to keep the Board of Adjustments and Appeals, in the unlikely event that we do have an appeal, as Lori said, as Lori intimated, is they wouldn't be able to make a decision, which sort of puts us into a quandary, because if you do have a local review process, statutes require you to go through that local review process first before appealing to the State Fire Marshal or the Florida Building Commission. So if we have a BAA and they can't make a decision based upon the makeup of the board or our local ordinance, then that applicant would be stuck here because they did not make it through the process and get a decision, so the ultimate deciders at the building commission or fire marshal's office couldn't act on something that didn't take place at the local level. So if the city council determines that the Board of Adjustments and Appeals is not necessary, we can certainly make the appropriate changes to the ordinance. There's some draft language in there. Of course, we'd get with Cliff and his office on how that would actually be worded, and we can bring that forward at a future meeting. So if there's any additional information you need, I could be happy to provide it to you. That's sort of the nuts and bolts of what we have so far.
Okay. Anybody have any questions on this? There's a question for you.
I have a question, and Cliff, I don't know if this is something you can answer, but from the last meeting, which is kind of different than the takeaway I have right now, that if we sunsetted our board, that we were essentially taking away a level of review, I guess, both from both parties. Is that accurate?
It's not that it's inaccurate, it's just that I don't think it represents what's actually happening, because it's not as if we get rid of the Board of Adjustment and Appeals, there's no review for the city, because the same process that the applicant who was denied or otherwise not happy with the result got, we would get at the state level. It just would be without our own citizens making the decision. It would be, for lack of a better way of putting it, trained professionals in building codes and fire codes and such as that. So you could argue it's like having a more professional jury. I mean, there's been arguments throughout, the court systems over time that maybe what we need is professional juries for these complicated cases involving engineering issues and such as that. We don't have that anywhere. But this is akin to that, because instead of having citizens that we try to pick in a proceeding where you go 1, 2, 3, and oh, we got a citizen, but who doesn't really know about this stuff, you have people who this is what they do day in and day out. So in that regard, both the city gets the same review in terms of consideration of their position as the applicant, and by people who in theory are qualified. I think the bigger issue, if you're trying to consider what you're weighing here, is local control. But I'm not sure this is an issue where local control is a particular advantage. I think the more accurate way to argue it would be like in federal court, where everything is done in writing. So the thing that you would give up more than local control is if I'm aggrieved by a decision, I can physically come to a location and talk to people and state my case. Whereas in this proceeding that's being anticipated, like in federal court, you have to write your case, you have to conclude all your evidence, the city has to respond to your case with its interpretation, and everything's in writing. Now, for me personally, having done a lot of federal court litigation as well as state, I prefer federal. Why? Because you can't argue your way around what's on the paper and what the photos show and so forth. And of course, the state has the ability to ask for more information and so forth, but the burden still remains on that person seeking the appeal to provide the case and have an organized thought process and so forth. Whereas sometimes, not necessarily the Board of Adjustment and Appeals, because that one meeting that they had in 2009, I think you said. I was at that one. I've been here since 2002. There's not a lot going on. So they had to be reminded. We had a workshop before that meeting just to let me remind you what you do, because they never knew. And so, you know, I think all things considered, it is a balance of saying, well, the citizens should be able to come and talk, but they're talking to people who don't understand necessarily any better than they do. So that's kind of how I would balance it out.
And either way, it's a final agency action, like in the sense of, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Since this is a decision item, let's open it up to public comment. Does anybody have any, the public have any comment on Board of Adjustment and Appeals in its future? Seeing none, let's close the public period. I would note that one of the fun things my wife and I did yesterday was to clean out the utility closet. And one of the questions we came to as we pulled items out was, when was the last time you touched this or used this? And there was a very large bag of things going to go after that. Just saying.
I'll make a motion to authorize authorize the city attorney or staff to draft and present ordinance sunsetting the Board of Adjustments and Appeals and adopting the appeals process that is identified by Florida statutes.
If it does not spark joy, get rid of it in a second.
All right, we had a motion in a second. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Wurzel?
Aye for the Marie Kondo ordinance.
Councilmember Wild?
Aye.
Councilmember Hall Harrison? Aye. Mayor Lance?
Aye.
I did note Mark saying that we shouldn't have 4 lawyers sitting on any single board.
That was a very tasteful way to say that.
I thought that was about engineers.
Right.
I don't know, that worked out really well with Cliff explaining it in terms of federal court. I was like, I get this. Do better.
Okay, that was our decision for the evening. We had a discussion item in regard to city charter amendments, and our city clerk has been going through our charter for finding things that perhaps need some help, and also you've been in touch with the supervisor of election office. Some items perhaps that we need to address that we didn't really think about before in terms of city charter. So, Lauren, would you like to take it away?
So, a few months ago, we embarked on getting the land development code posted online, and we started a recodification process subsequent with that for our general code, which I read the charter then and posed some questions to City Manager Reddington over where copies of the code will be furnished and accessible to the public, such as placed in libraries, public offices, and so forth. I think this is just old, antiquated language that is not been our current practice. So I called the library to ask, it's not, people don't come in, would you pay to host it online? So basically what we're asking you is just kind of clean it up to say that we have printed copy of the code shall be available to public inspection during business hours at the office of city clerk and shall be updated. You can set this how you would like. If the paper version will be quarterly and the online code updated, there again, fill the blank and we'll get this sent over to the attorney Shepherd.
We link directly to the Municode site, right? So, yeah, it seemed like no one is going to come in and look at this.
You may still have someone, we will keep them.
But nobody's going to go to the library, like.
And the library has free internet access, our Maitland library.
Right, so you can really go there.
Also, Mark, when we were discussing today, said that it was an approximation, but that the Muni code does allow anybody to purchase, and it was a pretty lower than Encyclopedia Britannica.
$70 or $75. Well, and that it would go up if you wanted a bound and tap one.
Sure, but, so that all seemed reasonable to me.
that's the first one, if we're in consensus with getting this one drafted with the others we previously discussed.
Guess we have to do this by charter amendment.
Yes, sir.
I mean, that seems, I'd be more apt for taking more out, trying to even, my thought would be to reduce this down, so this is not in a charter. That would be my thought. Instead of adding language, I would just take some language away. That's my thought.
So you're okay with ending it, with the, shall be known as the city, officially as the Maitland City Code, and ending it there? Is that what you're proposing?
Jim could do the ordinance, put together this charter. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we need to add anything. I mean, unless there's a requirement that we have to keep it, have to have a statement like that. Here's my thought. I think the lesson I've learned from some of this stuff on the charter, less is more. Less is better. Maybe not less is more, but less is better. Because if you have to amend the charter every time you got to fix language, the less language you got to potentially amend, in my opinion, that's better.
I think that's a fair statement. You know, I would be cautious about this one only because of perception, not reality. Perception might be for some that if you didn't allow this, you know, how does your basic citizen come in and figure out what's going on? They don't know how to use meaning code, et cetera, et cetera. But we never had it before. So from my perspective, I think that stopping it where you're suggesting stopping it is fine. And not everything has to be formalized in the charter, to your point. You can keep a current book. Just say, hey, Madam Clerk, keep a current book at the desk, you know. That's not something that has to be in your charter. But, you know, my only concern, if there is one at all, is any public perception that somehow they're losing something, which obviously I don't think that's the case, but I wanted to at least bring it to your attention.
That's my thought. My thought is just because you don't want to.
Because it'll show an outline version, right? That's what the public will see, to Cliff's point. So if I saw that and I was just voting and I wasn't listening to this, I might think that all we're doing, the purpose of the amendment was to take out all the part where the public gets a copy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to oversell it, but I also don't want to not acknowledge that that's a possibility of how people could see it, because when you see something and think, wait a minute, that's there and they want to take it out, my suspicious mind. Why would you do that?
Well, what about after as the Maitland City Code and shall be available for public inspection?
That's also fine.
And then we don't have to do anything more than that.
Because it would be anyway, it's a public record.
Right.
Yeah.
That's probably a nice compromise.
What do you think of that?
Wherever y'all want it, it's fine with me. I just think
No, I see your point, and I completely agree, but I also think Lori, who is a hyper analytical reader, who represents the views of many voters who would do similar things, will read it and go, well, wait a minute, they're taking away my ability to get a copy of this. I won't be able to read it. So if we just say it'll be publicly available for public inspection.
But also to Mr. Wild's point, that as things change over time, that
Yes, we are not, once we propel this thing into
it'll always be
cyberspace.
available
it's
somehow.
not going to- Yes.
whatever's the least way to make it sound, you can say it. That's how I would say it.
I think what Lindsay said is pretty big.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
There you go.
Excuse me.
That's how I would say it.
I needed to shorten that by one word.
Should say maybe available, just to really confuse me.
So we'll move on to the next one is section 804, necessity of qualifications beginning with form of oath. These were in the same section of the charter, just two separate issues. Supervisor elections locales holds in May a post-election roundtable, and one of his suggestions or ask of all of the cities that were there was to review our process for qualification and petition submission. And because in state statute it is defined as two separate processes. So essentially, we would have a petition submission period with a subsequent qualifying period. This allows him, he has had one of his asks on it is because he has had a lot of seasoned, long-time employees that have become eligible for retirement. It doesn't know how feasible it is with 6+ cities all having it at the same time, and him being able to get petitions turned in 11:55 on Friday, and us get a certification back same day service. So, as it's defined, I just threw in the draft language, presented some of this. It's not final. Cliff has given a 50,000-foot overview, but not his final on it. We would like to see filing the petitions of 50 or less, keeping that the same. With the city clerk, anytime noon, 14 days prior to start qualifying, but no later than noon on the 10th day prior to qualifying. And then I'll submit them to the supervisor elections for certifying. They'll return the candidate petition certification, and then each candidate with 50 valid verified signatures is duly entitled to come and qualify. The qualifying period would remain unchanged. Noon the 50th day till the noon on the 46th day.
I'm anticipating Mike on this one, because is it absolutely necessary to have all of this really super specific language?
I can comment about that. So, let's start with what the key to this whole situation is the verification of signatures and how long it takes both health office to do that. That's where this began. And this is something I actually ran up against relatively recently with Ponce Inlet, their charter changes, and also election petitions. And that going down the complicated road, it takes longer than you might expect. And if we kept our current qualifying period what it is really putting up against a deadline that may be possible for the county election supervisor to meet to have a candidate qualified under our charter. Because there's two different kinds of petitioning. One is this, which is requirement of our qualification regardless of whether you're going to pay the qualifying fee. And then there's a different kind of petition by which you can avoid paying the qualifying fee, which is a state fee, if you get a different petition signed by a different number of voters. And so this is something that every candidate, regardless of whether they're going to pay the fee or not, has to do in Maitland to get qualified. And if we don't give them a realistic timeline to get their petitions verified, there's a chance that they can come in per what our charter currently says and Bill Keller, I'm sorry, I can't get to it. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Seems like it is what it is.
Okay.
I'll say next.
You okay with us preparing some language for this amendment?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's just something we gotta do to avoid a potential disaster.
And even a worst case scenario is that then the Maitland City Clerk is verifying signatures
So,
herself,
right.
which puts her in the process, which we'd certainly rather keep her out of the process.
The next one is a continuation in section 8.04, where our current code there is on the left side of the screen, where we have codified in our charter a form for the oath to be. But everybody in this room, the candidate oath of nonpartisan office, it should look familiar because you all take it and sign it. Hopefully we remember it. They do not match up. We've been using the state prescribed form. I've spoke with Cliff on this, and by council direction, we could take oath out of being in the charter. That way we're not always behind what the statute may change.
Yeah, it makes sense just to make our oath in the charter match up with the United States statute. Is there any risk that none of us is actually seated right now?
No,
That was
there's
my
not a
question.
risk of that. It is not that it's an unsubstantial requirement, it is certainly substantial because violation of oath can be grounds for removal from office based on a recall petition, as we've had that discussion in the past. But no, the real thing is to avoid any confusion or discussion or unnecessary angst over which form and what governs, and if there's a word here or a word there that's different or changes over time. You know, I don't want, I would think that the state forms are something we should be able to rely on and not have to worry about a charter amendment, and I think that probably makes really good sense.
So lastly, I don't have a slide for this one because.
So okay for us to go ahead and prepare that?
Yeah.
Because I feel like we've kind of had a few conversations pertaining to the runoff elections, but there's one section in 803 just C for the runoff election that we haven't discussed before, and I don't think we got 100% clarity on how we wanted to proceed with drafting for runoffs. In our current city charter, it does say that the runoff election shall be held 4 weeks after the general city election. And unfortunately, that's not a date we choose. The supervisor of elections sets the date for the runoff election. So for example, if we would have had a runoff this past April 2022, it would have actually been 5 weeks post the general election because Bill's office there again sets that, and there will be very few times when it will make that. I've looked back historically within the last 5 years that it will make that 4 week window, and that's just because a runoff election is essentially thinking up and doing the exact same thing 4 to 5 weeks later, and there's just not enough time that everything he needs to accomplish in a very narrow. Essentially, if you're giving it 4 weeks, he really only has 3 weeks to get things ready. If it's 5 weeks, he's essentially getting 4 weeks to get things ready. So it's just another thing to maybe look about how we want to proceed with runoffs. Do we want it to be presented in a way to do away with them? Either way, we're going to have to clean some sections in the runoff up. And so I just would like a little bit clearer definition.
So when we talked about this initially a few months ago, what I took away from that conversation was that we were going to look at doing whoever reaches the post first, right? So that we were going to have the simple majority of whoever gets the most votes. Was that, am I missing the understanding of what we had talked about?
So I think that's where we are right now.
Okay.
So this is more
Because
of a
then
timing
this
issue.
becomes moot, right? Like, we just get rid of this language, because if we don't need a runoff, if we are just assuming that
Unless-
whoever candidate gets there first, right?
Unless it's a dead tie.
Unless it's a tie.
Could still be a tie, even if there's.
I mean, we could
Isn't that what we want?
Based on state law, they call it draw lots, but when you dig deep, and sadly I've had to dig deep in all this stuff, you can define the method of lots. It can literally be pulling straws, it can be pulling numbers out of a hat, it can be tic-tac-toe, it can be, as long as it's a game of chance or a process by which you can draw something with a random selection part of it, then that's what it's meant by drawing lots per state law, and that's how ties are broken. I can suggest to you that there are better ways to go through that process, but that is the state law process, and I would certainly recommend that if we're going to deal with ties, that's the way to go, as opposed to what others have suggested, which is, oh, well, we have a tie, let's have a runoff.
Right.
You had a tie, why?
The runoff makes sense in a three-way race.
Right, correct.
The runoff to-
Yeah, everybody go back and
It's just a do-over, is what it boils down to that point.
And I guess, I don't know if we had total agreement on that, but I thought we were kind of
That's
like,
correct. There was not total agreement, which is why
right.
I'm asking.
I guess we're gonna have a session where we'll take a vote on that, but I don't see the point of having runoff elections. I think the cost of this, rare. That's right.
It's your call. Let me just suggest that obviously this is a debate that has had the cost versus the idea of, we don't have this in Maitland now, but you could see a situation where you have 7 candidates and there's somebody gets a simple plurality of the votes, but that means maybe 19% of the votes.
Yeah.
And then they're the next whatever, without a runoff instead of the top two vote getters. And certainly you guys would know that in those categories where you have the last two standing, then sometimes, in fact, frequently, the one that came in second on the first go-round comes in first on the last go-round. So that's kind of what you're waiting
I thought the bound, or maybe a bounds, is just set some threshold in case you have, I would hate to have it where, but again, this is such an unlikely, we've had too recent of experience with this, but you would hate to have somebody win by 0.2% on a 20 to 20.2 percentage. That would be the deal. So I would say set it at a 25% or 1/3 minimum threshold, and if no candidate achieves more than.
Then there's a runoff.
Then
That's
there's a
fine. I mean, I don't care what you do. I'm
That
just
would be
saying,
my thought.
It is doable that way.
That was what I had Cliff's concern, which is that if you ever got 8 people in a race and somebody won by 0.2.
I'd be really excited if the people wanted to run for office.
Well, it sounds like we're not, like, it sounds like for sure we need to change the 4-week part.
Yes.
And we probably have consensus on the tie situation, the two-way tie. Right. I tend to fall more where Mr. Wild is on lowering a threshold. So if someone, I don't know, has 50.0, for example. But,
Has that ever happened?
That makes sense. The threshold, whether it's 30% or 35%, whatever, makes sense to me. You don't want somebody who wants 19%. So,
I just don't think it would sit well with anybody.
Okay, so I think this has been brought up before I was sitting up here on the 33, 33, 33. So would you be comfortable with 35% being the threshold? And
Sure. Well, 34.
Is there a mathematical number, Cliff, that you have seen of that makes sense?
No, actually, for everyone that we represent, it's 50% plus one.
So to answer your question, if there was, so you would always be left with 2. If you if someone didn't achieve a minimum of 34%, right, it would be, you're saying if it was a dead tie between 3, if all 3 candidates got 1/3 of the vote, then you could potentially set yourself up for a redo. That would be interesting.
3-way tie.
So what's the scenario then if you had?
what if he has? That's 35%.
35% is as good as anything I can come up with.
Yeah, I mean, it's 34, you can avoid it by 34, right? Anything above 33 1/3 gets you where you're going. So I would try to set it as low as you could, but not make it silly. So 35%, and if you don't get 35%, then you have to have a runoff. And if, what happens then in the scenario if everybody gets a third?
Well, if nobody gets over 33%, then it would still be the top 2 vote getters, even if the first one was 34 and this next one was depending on how many candidates, was 12. It really wouldn't matter. It's whoever the top 2 is. That's what a runoff has always been about historically.
And then if you gave us suggestions for the tie situation, that would be applicable no matter how many people have
Yeah,
tied.
right, exactly.
So did we learn? Good.
Well, but isn't it, I don't want to overthink this.
But then we're still in a runoff situation, right? We have to-
Yeah, that's what I'm just trying to, my thought is if everybody got a third,
But still wouldn't have 35, so you'd be a do-over.
right, but should be, how would you ever get the top 2?
Right.
Well, again, if everyone tied, then you'd have the tiebreaker apply to the runoff candidates and have them pull lots till you got down to 2.
I'm kind of in favor of the drawing lots.
That's for a tie period. So whether it's a tie to get into the runoff or a tie in the runoff, that's how it would work.
So I don't care what the number is, and then if you tie, it'll be
Draw
fun.
lots.
So if there's 10 people, they all tied, we all have a great
It'd be a
game of
Darts. Right.
Who
Who knows?
well,
Oh, there's I like that one.
we spent way too much time thinking about this, but
Okay.
So council in the future will thank us.
maybe.
So Cliff could draft up some language for you to consider when we bring all the charter amendments back on that one?
Yes.
Okay.
But I came from squeaking.
And can we make sure that this will only go on a
we will only hold a charter amendment on an election that's actually happening, but for charter amendments. I'd hate to have an election just to have charter amendments.
We can't do that because we'll have to prepare this. I mean,
Well, for this one, since it was our charter review and we're adding to it, we can control it and say the next general election, whenever that would be, or we can call a special and pay for it. It's up to y'all. That's easy. But in terms of generally, there's a different process if it's a voter-initiated charter amendment.
Yeah, we're in control of when we want to send it to the voters.
Right, exactly. Just going to be by the ordinance you send
No, what
out.
I'm saying is, I think what she's saying is, let's say nobody runs against in the next election, and they're uncontested seats.
It's still up to you guys.
We
For
can
this,
pull it back.
huh?
We can pull it back.
Sure you could.
Okay.
You amend every ordinance by just having a meeting and doing it.
Or we can just tack this on to like the November election, right? When we know voters are gonna show up.
that's another, Bill Cowles is not, and I think Mark and I heard him say this, he's not a fan of tacking on city under the November elections. So,
Voter turnout gets significantly higher, which is good and bad.
Right.
It's very different. I think that's what maybe why he doesn't want it.
he says it just lends the confusion of the separation now, we're typically in a March election, and now we've got something in May, and I mean, on November.
Okay.
Good. Got any others? No?
I'm done.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so much time.
All right, it's reports time. Mr. City Attorney, any report?
We have finally put to bed the Arch insurance matter. The rebate of $50,000 was provided, and we got to sign a written release. It took a very long time to do that. I did, but that's over. And as for the Peacock Board case, you heard me say last time that they had dropped their Bird Harris claim, at least for now. Whether they're going to bring it back, we'll see. In favor of 3 Beck actions, which we have filed a motion to dismiss on, and we are in the process within the next week to 2 weeks of filing a motion for prevailing party attorney's fees, which we are told that they will oppose because our offer to settle, which was you don't have a case, and therefore we're not changing anything, which we have now proven by the fact they dismissed their claim, that offer of settlement, which is per the statute, is somehow in bad faith. Don't ask me to explain it. I've given up. And so we will now fight over entitlement, and they'll pay fees over that.
Okay,
A lot of drama.
just want to keep winning. All right, Mr. City Manager.
Just a quick reminder, although Lori gave you little cheat sheets, next Monday, July 18th, is our general fund workshop, budget season. Then Tuesday at noon, library and art history will present their budgets to you, and then we will, on July 25th, set the tentative millage rate. So that's near-term budget.
Okay. Excellent. Mr. Clerk, anything? Anybody from council have anything to report? Okay, well, I think that's it. It's adjourned.